Not much is known about Gege Akutami, the author of Jujutsu Kaisen, other than the fact that he's not human. Actually, he's a one-eyed cat. Joking aside, he actually chose this avatar because drawing two symmetrical eyes was a bother, and he figured that everybody likes cats. Despite the lack of information, especially when compared to other popular mangaka, you can still piece together a rather interesting journey of an author who started from humble beginnings and suddenly blew up, creating a manga that has embedded itself within pop culture, largely due to the lobotomy Kaisen memes.
Are you strong because you're not, I'd win? Or did you leave it all behind and stand proud because with this treasure, I summon always bet on Hikari?
Unfortunately, the ending of Jujutsu Kaisen has been met with not very good reception. Over the course of the manga's serialization, the story expanded and expanded. Then, at the height of Jujutsu Kaisen's popularity, Gege Akutami dropped one of the most controversial endings in recent history. This is the story of a passionate mangaka who, despite the odds, tried his hardest to meet the expectations for one of the largest manga series of the modern era. Despite his most prominent manga presenting a scathing critique of modern society, he found himself succumbing to the same system he denounced. This is the cog in the machine dilemma. Alright, before we begin, I got two announcements. Firstly, I made a Patreon, so if you want to support me, go ahead and check it out. I have a Q&A set up there already. I also plan to have more goodies later on, like early videos and exclusive content. If you're generous enough to help me out, I'll put your name in the video credits, and you will have my utmost gratitude. Secondly, I have a Twitter now, so go follow it for updates and shitposts. That's about all. Let's continue with the video. Gege Akutami's story begins on February 26, 1992 in Iwate Prefecture, Japan. His real birth name is unknown. As a kid, Akutami did not initially like drawing. He would only draw for school assignments and such, but in 4th grade he gained an interest in Bleach, the famous manga written by Tite Kubo. Akutami's older brother would always read weekly Shonen Jump, but the older brother, who was very possessive of his belongings, wouldn't let Akutami read the magazine. One day, while the older brother was away, Akutami secretly read one issue, which happened to be the one where Bleach debuted. Akutami realized that mangaka were incredible, and he was hooked ever since. Funnily enough, he didn't continue reading Bleach weekly. He only read chapters every now and then whenever his older brother was away. Akutami was so enamored with Bleach that he actually wrote a Bleach-inspired poem anthology called Kumo no Kyojin, or Cloud Giant in English. He doesn't know where it is anymore because he gave it to one of his juniors when he was still in high school. He can no longer contact this person, and the poem anthology has likely been lost forever. A major turning point occurred in 5th grade when Akutami's family moved to Sendai. He made a new friend who drew manga-style art, and that was when Akutami realized that drawings were not just fun to look at, but also fun to make. He mimicked his friend, and that's when the dream of becoming a mangaka began. Other than Bleach, many other works have inspired Gege Akutami. One major inspiration is Hideaki Anno and Neon Genesis Evangelion. In fact, Akutami seems to be a pretty huge mecha fan because he also mentioned how much he enjoyed Code Geass and Eureka 7. One of his early one-shots actually happens to be about a person that pilots a monstrous mecha. Akutami also thought that Evangelion's use of religious symbolism was interesting, so he sought to do the same thing in Jujutsu Kaisen, utilizing Buddhist symbolism. Other major inspirations are Pulp Fiction, directed by Quentin Tarantino, and Interstellar, directed by Christopher Nolan. He was drawn to these gritty, thought-provoking works that push narrative and visual boundaries, and those things would later become hallmarks in his own storytelling. It's interesting that Akutami doesn't mention Parasite, which is something that comes to mind when I see the cover of Jujutsu Kaisen's first volume. On top of that, both of these manga are about a regular guy who suddenly gets a powerful entity stuck inside of them, although that whole concept is actually pretty widespread if you think about it. Eventually, Gege Akutami went on to attend an audiovisual school where he learned video editing. He has also been making storyboards since high school, so he's been practicing art for a pretty long time. Then, in 2014, Gege Akutami was able to land a job in the manga industry, working as an assistant for Yasuhiro Kano in the series Kiss X Death, or maybe Kiss Death because usually the X is silent. The manga is about really tiny aliens who have been sent to Earth for punishment. These aliens were meant to be attached to little animals like frogs and rabbits, but due to an accident, the aliens bonded to 5 nearby girls instead. And so the person responsible for the accident must detach the aliens from these girls by, you guessed it, kissing them. You know, sometimes I gotta hand it to mangaka for coming up with such unique ideas. Before entering the manga industry, Akutami experimented with various art styles and storytelling techniques. Though he eventually transitioned to digital drawing, he had originally created his early works traditionally, finding this raw, authentic appeal in physical art forms. Yet as he moved closer to professional serialization, he felt that digital tools would allow him to improve his skills and create more efficiently. Still, he maintained an analog aesthetic that he always admired. While working as an assistant, Akutami started drawing his own manga, and on May 7th of 2014, he would officially begin his manga career by publishing his first ever one-shot. I feel that a lot can be gleaned from a creator's first work, and Akutami's one-shots are no exception. Akutami has noted that he always admired creators who forged their own path rather than imitating others, a principle that shaped his own career. While Bleach inspired him to begin creating manga, he knew early on that simply copying Kubo's work would be limiting. He wanted to carve out his own narrative style, drawing on both his influences and his unique take on themes like sacrifice and societal expectations. In Akutami's first one-shot, titled Kamishiro Sosa, he introduces readers to a world where a mysterious supernatural phenomenon isolates an island by covering it with a massive lid, effectively cutting it off from the rest of the world. The main story revolves around a duo from the God Weapon Control Division who are sent to investigate and resolve the island's strange predicament. In this world, powerful beings called kami exist, based around the Shinto kami of Japanese culture. Each kami has a unique specialty or power that defines their zone of influence, such as a kami of pots, or swords, or whatever you can imagine. The protagonists of Kamishiro Sosa also work under an organized division with a bureaucratic approach to handling supernatural threats, similar to the structure of the Jujutsu world, where sorcerers are essentially janitors tasked with exorcising curses. The themes of Kamishiro Sosa aren't anything too complex or thought-provoking. It's mostly just a, intro to a battle shonen, but it has a super cool and simple power system. Since it's his first work, the art is also a little messy, but I would have loved to see a lot more of the story. Then, on May 1st, 2015, Gege Akutami published his second one-shot, titled Number 9. In this world, all humans are accompanied by supernatural entities called Iri, which are highly reminiscent of curses, and also stands. The idea of Iri acting as reflections or extensions of human emotions aligns closely with how Jujutsu Kaisen curses often manifest from intense negative emotions. The story centers on 9, a highly skilled Iri user tasked with solving the mysterious murder of a girl's grandfather. Two versions of this manga were actually published in the same year. The second one, which was released in October 10th, 2015, has a different story, though it still features 9 as the protagonist. The two Number 9 one-shots highlight Akutami's early exploration of moral ambiguity and the complexity of human relationships. The protagonists are flawed and conflicted, hinting at his preference for characters that are neither purely good or purely evil, but still driven by deeply personal and empathetic motives. Also, this one-shot shows how Akutami really likes to draw his main characters to look deranged. The fourth one-shot, possibly the most ambitious one, is Nikai Bangai Bara Baru Jura. Pretty long title. It's about a world where God literally deletes all weapons on Earth, but then kaiju attack. In response, the Japanese government creates artificial kaiju piloted by humans, resembling Evangelions. I guess mechas are technically not weapons? I don't really know. In any case, the protagonist, Norima, eventually encounters a kaiju pilot named Hanami, and when she faces defeat in battle, Norima steps in to assist, piloting the artificial kaiju to defeat the monstrous threat. From what you can tell, Norima is essentially a prototype Yuji Itadori. They have similar designs, they both do a similar jump kick, and they're both abnormally strong people. Each of these early works reveals key elements that Gege Akutami would later integrate into Jujutsu Kaisen. In Kamishiro Sosa, we see the idea of supernatural bureaucracy and specialized roles, which translates directly into the Jujutsu Society's hierarchical structure. In Number 9, Akutami explores the dark side of human nature and how emotions shape supernatural beings, which is foundational to Jujutsu Kaisen's cursed spirits. Finally, in Nikai Bangai Bara Baru Jura, he makes Yuji and says, copy-paste. Okay, Norima and Yuji aren't exactly the same person, but it's amusing how similar they are. As a whole, Gege Akutami's one-shots are more than just practice runs. They're self-contained explorations of the ideas, characters, and conflicts that he would later expand upon in Jujutsu Kaisen. But before we can get into Jujutsu Kaisen, we must first talk about its prequel. In 2017, Gege Akutami began his first manga serialization, albeit a short one. The original title is Tokyo Metropolitan Cursed Technical School, but it was retroactively named to Jujutsu Kaisen 0. Yeah, I'm glad he decided to shorten it. Jujutsu Kaisen 0 was published in Jump Giga, the sister magazine to Shonen Jump, which releases new issues every season. Jujutsu Kaisen 0 was later adapted into a full movie by Studio Mappa. The story follows a cursed boy named Yuta Okatsu, who enters a magical school so that he can free himself from his curse and save others from an evil sorcerer. It's interesting how the art is noticeably more clean than the main Jujutsu Kaisen series. Maybe Akutami transitioned to a more sketchy style so that he could draw faster and meet the weekly deadlines. What I admire the most from Jujutsu Kaisen 0 is how efficient and concise the plot is. It introduces interesting characters, develops them well, and manages to create multiple emotional payoffs all within 4 chapters that are each only 40 to 50 pages long, except for the first chapter, which is a little longer at 54 pages. My only gripe with the story is actually Geto, the main villain, who seems comically evil. In fact, when I first watched the movie, I hated it, but after seeing Geto and Gojo's backstory, everything was recontextualized, and Jujutsu Kaisen 0 actually became one of my favorite parts in the series, despite it being just a short prequel. You see, as Yuta comes to terms with Rika's death and recognizes that his love for her should not hold her spirit captive, he learns a powerful lesson about moving on from loss. In accepting Rika's death and releasing her spirit, he undergoes a cathartic transformation that allows him to understand the true nature of love, one that cherishes the memories of those lost without holding them back. This theme of acceptance contrasts with Geto's inability to let go of his own disillusionment, highlighting the different ways characters handle trauma and loss. Jujutsu Kaisen 0 also tackles prototype ideas for what would later become the cog in the machine mentality of the main series. Even though Jujutsu Kaisen 0 was supposed to end with 4 chapters, it was so popular that Akutami was able to secure a spot in Weekly Shonen Jump. In fact, he received unanimous approval from the serialization committee. Originally, he had no intention of serializing Jujutsu Kaisen. In fact, Akutami wanted to create an idol manga at first. I'm very curious how something like that would actually turn out, especially since his past one-shots are a far cry from your typical idol story. Still, hints of idol culture actually seeped into Jujutsu Kaisen, as shown by Toto, who is a huge idol fan. While it might seem like Akutami was forced into continuing Jujutsu Kaisen, that is not the case. With advice from his editor, Akutami figured that it was easier writing a story from something he already created, especially considering how popular it had already become. After all, Jujutsu Kaisen 0 was already going to be compiled into its own volume, so it could serve as a prelude for a new story set in the same world. The pieces are now all in place for the serialization of Jujutsu Kaisen. March 5th, 2018 marks the day that the first chapter of Jujutsu Kaisen was published in Weekly Shonen Jump. It centers around Itadori Yuji, who has eaten a finger from the world's most powerful curse, Ryomen Sukuna. Yuji must then join the secret Jujutsu Society to help defeat this curse. In the beginning of the serialization, there was actually a time when the series was at risk of being cancelled. To prevent that from happening, Akutami introduced a twist, the main character's quote-unquote death. We all know Yuji doesn't actually die, but it added a lot of interest in the first volume, allowing him to retain readership. When reading Jujutsu Kaisen from the get-go, it quickly differentiates itself from the average battle shonen manga. Sure, it may be generic with its initial setup and its use of tropes, but the characters have a surprising amount of subtlety in the way they're developed. Instead of the characters gaining dramatic shifts in worldview, most of them change little by little after each encounter and each interaction. The first few arcs are a good introduction to the Jujutsu world, laying the groundwork for the main players and the stakes of the story. And of course, it brought us Gojo, the real main character.
Reverse script technique really did save me, huh?
Truly, the impact of Gojo cannot be understated. In the past, plenty of manga have included fan service female characters, but none of them had the same effect as a hot man. It even came to the point that Akutami's wife said she would leave him for Gojo if Gojo was a real person. I'm so glad that my favorite character Gojo remains alive and well for the entire story, right? So anyway, season 1 of the anime drops in fall 2019, skyrocketing the popularity of the series, but it wasn't necessarily the biggest show at the time, especially since Demon Slayer's first season just came out and Attack on Titan season 4 aired in the subsequent season. But of course, everything would change with the release of season 2. The first part of this season covers Gojo and Geto's backstory. It's the Hidden Inventory arc. It sheds light on what made the characters who they are in the present timeline. It also contextualizes a lot of what happens in Jujutsu Kaisen 0, allowing me to have a better appreciation of the prequel. It also introduces a fan favorite character, Toji. who gains incredible characterization within a short runtime. It wasn't long before the Gojo backshots and the Honored One memes began taking over social media. Following the hidden inventory arc, Jujutsu Kaisen goes into the climactic Shibuya incident, which is what everything so far has been leading toward. It is the culmination of the villain's plans. The entire world gets shaken up by this event and characters undergo major change. This is when Yuji first relegates himself to being a cog in the machine, but more on that later. Next is the Fortnite arc. No, the Culling Game arc. The Culling Game is an interesting take on the standard tournament arc, instead being a battle royale without an organized bracket. It allows for a more free-flow progression of encounters, and it makes the downtime feel more dangerous because there's no real break between fights. You can never be completely safe. While the Culling Game starts off with intense fights, it quickly garnered criticism, mostly aimed toward the pacing, which is likely due to the weekly format. Chainsaw Man Part 2 suffered from a similar thing, where reading it weekly does not feel nearly as satisfying as binging the arcs. The Culling Game also comes directly after what is arguably the best arc in the story, especially at that time. It is always difficult for a story to live up to the hype of a climactic moment, but it is necessary for the Culling Game to slow down a little more to introduce characters and set up for the final showdown in the future. But that is not to say that all criticisms of the Culling Game are unwarranted. There is a notable messiness to the structure and a sudden introduction of many characters who are either insignificant in the long run of the story or serve as mere plot devices. For example, we have Kurisu, Hana, and Angel. Hana is first mentioned by Tengen during the early stages of the Culling Game because the main characters needed someone who could extinguish a cursed technique. Lo and behold, there just so happens to be a character who can do that, even though she has never once been mentioned in the past. It's extremely contrived. Even when she becomes a major part in the story, she's so powerful that she has to be nerfed, and she doesn't contribute more to the main story until the final fight with Sukuna, where her cursed technique is used as a last resort to disable him. Additionally, we have Tsumiki, Megumi's sister. She is his entire reason for joining the Culling Game in the beginning, but she is given no characterization before she is basically removed from the story and replaced by Yorozu, who takes over her body. Even Akutami himself admits that he regrets not handling Tsumiki very well. Other than the previously mentioned characters, we have others who only serve as minor plot devices, such as Charles, who is essentially a discount Rohan Kishibe. Charles's backstory is a very out-of-place criticism of how Japanese people treat foreigners in the manga industry, especially since the manga has never dealt with those themes in the past and will never again deal with those themes in the future. In the end, Charles only serves as a way to show Hakari's domain and lead up to the fights between Hakari and Kashimo. Charles is never again used in the story, making his scenes feel pointless in the end. It may seem like I'm hating on the Culling Game, and while I do have a PhD in complaining, the Culling Game has significantly more flaws than previous story arcs. These flaws likely stem from Akutami's health condition. It's no secret that mangaka are getting sick left and right, usually due to overwork, and Akutami is no exception. You can even see a dip in art quality for many chapters. I genuinely believe Gege Akutami is an exceptional author who can write a great story when given the time, as shown by how amazing the Shibuya arc is, but the Culling Game is when the cracks of the story start to show. Still, I believe that the Culling Game plays an incredibly important role in fleshing out the overall themes of the story, but more on that later. This leads us to Jujutsu Kaisen's final arc, Shinjuku Showdown. It begins with the battle between the strongest sorcerer of history versus the strongest sorcerer of today, Sukuna versus Gojo. By all rights, this fight should be absolutely insane, but the pacing is bogged down by massive bouts of exposition explaining the ins and outs of all the powers and techniques. In normal cases, you won't need all that exposition because it's good practice for authors to set up everything before one of the most important fights of the series, right? But at this point of the story, Jujutsu Kaisen's power system keeps on adding new things, mostly techniques used to counter domain expansions. Even though the concept of a domain expansion is cool, they are so overpowered that it feels like Akutami really wrote himself into a corner when he designed them. They're literally special moves that 100% ensure a one-sided victory, unless Akutami invents specific methods to counter the sure hit effect, which makes all the various anti-domain techniques feel contrived. Why would you create something so powerful just so that you can nerf it every time it's used? As the legendary fantasy author Sanderson Sama once said,
"Go deeper into a magic instead of wider." This is the idea that a fewer number of things in a world-building situation that are well explored will actually feel like a wider, cooler world than a large number of things explored very shallowly.
By doing so, you seldom run the risk of weird powers that were suddenly pulled from a hat. The story feels more streamlined because there are less extraneous aspects that add too much complexity to a magic system. And while we're on the topic of her great and glorious Sanderson-sama, he also states that
your ability to solve problems with magic in a satisfying way, this one gets an underline, is directly proportional to how well the reader understands said magic.
if you take out all the exposition from the Gojo and Sukuna fight, it would be pretty hard to understand what happens, and when the exposition is added, it damages the pacing, yanking the reader away from the climactic fight. It's a catch-22. Once again, Gege Akutami has written himself into a corner, likely due to the tight manga scheduling, resulting in a lack of time to fully plan his story beforehand. Of course, the biggest corner that Akutami has written is probably Gojo. He's so overpowered that he has to be physically removed from the story for interesting things to happen. Still, I gotta hand it to Akutami because the way Gojo is sealed in Shibuya is extremely well done. The villains must use an intricate plan to outsmart Gojo, and even then, he's able to deal major damage to them. When Gojo returns for the Sukuna fight, we finally get to see him in full power again, only for him to, well, die. His death caused a massive uproar, and it became one of the most widespread spoilers for non-manga readers. At the time, many people were holding out hope that Gojo would actually come back with some healing, but that never happened. Well, technically, he didn't come back. The way Akutami views character death is actually pretty interesting. He believes that a character shouldn't die unless it evokes an emotional reaction, which is why Mei survives the Shibuya incident. It's a good philosophy to have because it prevents the author from writing gratuitous deaths that don't really contribute to an emotional payoff. Despite the criticisms of Gojo's death, I fully believe that it was necessary because mentors are supposed to die in stories. Now, I don't mean physically die because there are plenty of mentor characters that survive until the end. Take Yoda, for example. A mentor's death is essentially the moment the pupil surpasses them and they become a mentor no longer. Or, it's when the mentor is no longer able to fight for the pupil any longer, forcing them to stand up for themselves. By having Sukuna defeat Gojo, it shows just how much of a threat Sukuna is, and it allows the characters to rise up, leading to the raid that follows. As Sukuna runs through the gauntlet of Jujutsu sorcerers, we get some of the craziest fights, and Yuji finally gets his curse technique, a dismantling ability similar to Sukuna. Yuta also takes over Gojo's body, resulting in a form of pseudo-resurrection, so we do still get a little more of Gojo in the end. But then, for some reason, Nobara comes back? It's really weird because although Akutami never fully confirmed Nobara's death, she was never once hinted at being alive or helping out with the Sukuna raid. Her appearance literally comes out of nowhere. Another massive issue with bringing back a dead character is that it takes away from the significance of other characters' development. Yuji, having to witness firsthand the deaths of Nanami and Nobara, have caused him significant pain, and those are major factors that force him into the Cog mentality. So when Nobara is brought back, the development feels less genuine. I would also be remiss if I didn't talk about Yuji's domain expansion, Talk no Jujutsu. Yeah, even though I know that Yuji's domain is actually one that cuts through a person's soul directly, it's still pretty funny when he takes Sukuna to his hometown for a good old-fashioned conversation. The thing is, I actually really like the discussion because it completes Yuji's character arc as he realizes that the value of life doesn't come from the role that someone plays within society, but instead all lives matter, no matter how meaningless they may seem. It's a cathartic ending to Yuji's storyline. But then the ending happens, and Gege Akutami shits the bed. Yeah, the ending to Jujutsu Kaisen is pretty bad, and if you think otherwise, you're straight coping, bro. Everyone's all happy, even though the world is in a horrible state. Tengen's barrier is gonna fail, cursed energy is now public knowledge, and multiple wards in Tokyo have been obliterated. Meanwhile, Yuta is the only real special grade. Yuji and Maki are also pretty strong, but Gojo was basically the keystone that held the Jujutsu world together. Now he's gone, but we still get a nice Disney ending after all. When the last few chapters of the manga were announced, Gege Akutami said that he would try his hardest to satisfy as many of his fans as possible. It's ironic because in his attempt to satisfy everyone, he barely satisfied anyone. If I were to sum up the central thematic question of JJK, I would say that the story revolves around the dilemma between the individual and the greater good. It is a question that many of the major characters in the series must answer for themselves. For this reason, JJK is actually one massive critique of Japanese society. Alright, hear me out. We are first introduced to the concept of the individual versus the greater good with Yuji, who has eaten Sukuna's finger, resulting in a death penalty that is only postponed until he's able to eat the rest of the fingers. That is his role in the world, to be a vessel, and it doesn't matter what his individual desires are. It's only with Gojo's help that Yuji isn't killed on the spot. Through the lens of Yuji's eyes, readers are presented with a multitude of questions such as, to what extent can we justify killing one person for the sake of the greater good? If someone's loved ones were threatened by the existence of someone, would we be okay with letting that person live? What if that person went on to kill more people? Doesn't Yuji, the individual, have the right to live? Similarly, in JJK 0, Yuta suffers from a similar dilemma. He's also another person who is stuck with a super powerful curse that can harm many people, leading him to feel as if life doesn't matter. Over the course of the story, he makes valuable friends that help him regain the will to live, but in the end, he resigns to self-sacrifice, willing to die if it meant defeating Geto. Nanami is another prime example because he was quite literally a Japanese salaryman. He views sorcerers as janitors of society. It's a crazy dangerous job with seldom any reward, and yet he continues to be a cog in the Jujutsu machine because he has found purpose in the little bits of appreciation he gets from the people he saves. He has struck a balance between the cog and the individual, choosing to stray from a life of mundane business work in exchange for an equally tedious job that he can still gain satisfaction from. Then in the Hidden Inventory arc, Riko is meant to become Tengen's vessel, and her sacrifice is meant to uphold the safety and order of the Jujutsu world. But doesn't she deserve to live as well? What happens when someone decides that enough is enough and they don't want to sacrifice themselves for the collective anymore? That's where we get one of my favorite antagonists in manga, Suguru Geto. He was once a well-regarded sorcerer who could go toe-to-toe with Gojo himself, but after the death of Riko, everything changed. Geto started questioning why he was stuck in an endless cycle of exercising curses, risking his life for people that don't even care about him. He doesn't want any more sorcerers to suffer the same fate as her. During Geto's discussion with Tsukumo Yuki, he learns that curses originate from regular people, and she explains that there are two ways to end curses: either eradicate cursed energy from humanity, or teach people how to control cursed energy. Geto didn't see any of those options as realistic, so he chose a third path: kill all non-sorcerers. To justify himself, he started calling non-sorcerers monkeys, considering them an inferior species that doesn't deserve to live. Geto represents the extreme individual who wants to tear down all of society to avenge the people who are forced to suffer under the weight of the collective. Despite his disposition, Geto still has a soft spot, which we see in JJK 0 when he spares the lives of Maki, Toge, and Panda. Gojo specifically sent those three because they are Yuta's closest friends, and their deaths could be the catalyst for Yuta to transcend in power. Geto recognizes that those three have been swept up in the machine, so he takes pity on them, unwilling to waste a promising sorcerer's life. While many characters are developed around their views of the Cog mentality, one particular arc stands out as a culmination of the story's thematic question: the culling game. To explain, I must first give a quick ecology lesson. You see, the Japanese name for the culling game is Shimetsu Kaiu. The literal translation is something along the lines of annihilation migration or abortive migration, relating to a real-life phenomenon in fish. Essentially, Japan has the Tsushima Current, which sends warm water far north, allowing tropical and subtropical fish to live as far as Hokkaido. But during the winter, despite the warm current, the water temperature rapidly drops, killing those tropical fish if they do not migrate. In Japan, these species are known as Shimetsu Kaiu Gyo, or abortive migration fish. Similarly, Kenjaku has forced the players of the culling game in a dangerous territory, where the cold waters are symbolic of the curse technique removal of the players if they fail to adapt. This aspect ties to Kenjaku's true individualistic philosophy of adapting and doing whatever it takes to avoid death. In this way, Kenjaku's culling game exemplifies the dehumanizing cog in the machine mindset. Each participant becomes part of a grand impersonal system, forced to play a role without true autonomy or choice, mirroring the societal expectation often seen in the corporate and bureaucratic structures of modern Japan. For Kenjaku, the sorcerers are not people with aspirations and emotions. They are simply pieces of his ultimate plan of ascension and evolution. He shows how the people on the top often only care for personal gain, not really caring about anyone below them. Yet, within this machine, Akutami allows moments of defiance and resilience to emerge. The modern sorcerers' victories over their ancient counterparts demonstrate how innovation, adaptability, and solidarity can disrupt even the most entrenched systems. This defiance of that machine suggests that people are not bound to remain cogs. They can redefine their roles. The cog in the machine becomes not just a symbol of oppression, but also a challenge to break free. Shinjuku Showdown is then the natural conclusion of the ideas that were developed in the culling game. In the fight between Gojo and Sukuna, Gojo serves as a shining example of individual excellence that is trapped within the societal machine he operates within. Since his birth, Gojo has been a tool, an unrivaled powerhouse who protects society from its worst threats. For years, Gojo has accepted and even relished this role, bearing the immense burden of being the cornerstone of the Jujutsu establishment, tasked with defending everyone and carrying the entire system on his shoulders. When Geto asked him are you the strongest because you're Satoru Gojo? Or are you Satoru Gojo because you're the strongest? It's truly heartbreaking because Geto knows Gojo's loneliness. The reason why the two of them are so close is because Geto cares about the real Gojo, not Gojo of the 6 eyes and the limitless technique. When Gojo loses his one true friend, it's so sad. While Geto might cope with the cruel system by being stuck in the past, Gojo looks to the future and works toward a way to change Jujutsu society from within. The tragedy of Gojo's character arc is that, despite his overwhelming strength, he's still a part of a system that uses him as a tool rather than an individual with his own dreams or needs. His strength, while celebrated, creates a gap between him and others, making him a cog too specialized, too essential to be replaced or even truly understood. His eventual death, while shocking, is absolutely inevitable. The system he serves demands sacrifice, and Gojo, as the ultimate cog, fulfills that role. His downfall reinforces that even the strongest cog, when too dependent on the machinery it serves, can still be crushed by it. After Gojo's defeats, the final battle against Sukuna shifts to the ordinary sorcerers, characters who are often treated as lesser cogs compared to Gojo's role in the hierarchy. Yet, it is through their collaborative efforts that Akutami portrays a new kind of strength that is not based on individual power, but on unity and adaptability, qualities that allow individuals to resist the machine rather than conform to it. In contrast to Gojo's solitary battle, the raid against Sukuna is done by others who are united not by duty, but by personal conviction and shared goals. Unlike Gojo, who bore the weight of expectation alone, the raid group rejects the isolation that comes with being a cog. They have a sense of agency that allows them to face Sukuna as more than just tools for the Jujutsu society. Each character in the raid against Sukuna represents a break from the rigid roles assigned to them. Yuji, as the main character, is the epitome of this rejection. Initially, he was meant to be a sacrificial pawn, a vessel for Sukuna's eventual destruction, but in the final battle against Sukuna, Yuji escapes from the cog mentality. By then, he has fully rejected the idea that his life's value is tied to his utility. Rather than fighting out of a sense of duty or obligation, Yuji now fights for his own beliefs. This is why I think the Talk no Jutsu domain expansion is actually genius. Yuji shows Sukuna, a cold-hearted monster, the beauty of everyday life and the value obtained from performing simple tasks rather than working for a cruel system that doesn't care about him. In the end, Yuji's transformation demonstrates that people can choose to break free from the roles imposed upon them and seek a life that respects their own humanity. His belief becomes a testament to the power of self-determination and the belief that no one's life should be defined solely by their utility to others. The exhaustive analysis of Jujutsu Kaisen finally brings us back to Gege Akutami himself. His journey as the creator of JJK mirrors the very cog-in-the-machine mentality that his story critiques. Even though Jujutsu Kaisen began with a vision to explore the themes of individual autonomy and resistance to oppressive systems, Akutami ironically found himself ensnared in a system of relentless demands, strict deadlines, and commercial pressures within the manga industry, essentially becoming a cog within that same creative machine. It's no secret that the grueling weekly schedule of Shonen Jump often prioritizes constant outputs over the well-being of the creator. While not as common anymore, some creators are even forced to continue their series past the original intended ending, which is why Boruto exists. Much like the society in Jujutsu Kaisen, which places sorcerers in positions of sacrifice for the greater good of the world, the manga industry places creators in roles where they're expected to make sacrifices to satisfy the voracious demands of publication schedules. This industry machine expects manga creators to keep producing and producing regardless of the physical and mental toll it may take, sometimes even leading to death. It is only when someone has reached legendary status like Eiichiro Oda that they can take frequent breaks, but even then his health is not the best. Otherwise, for a mangaka that's not super popular, they may lose readership and subsequently lose their spots in the magazine's roster. It's a cutthroat situation that actually mirrors the culling game. This is why several mangaka have switched to Shonen Jump's online counterpart, Shonen Jump Plus, where the deadlines are less strict and where there's not as much stress over a series being cancelled. It's not just the work conditions that pressure authors, though. You also have the audience who are quick to voice their criticisms, resulting in moments when Akutami's storytelling choices might reflect this tension between personal vision and external expectations. Take the happy Disney ending, for example. Jujutsu Kaisen has never been a series that shied away from killing major characters or having tragic endings to arcs, especially if it served the plot. But when Gojo died, the intense backlash likely influenced Akutami's decision for the final few chapters, bringing back characters like Nobara and Higuruma, who should be dead by all logical accounts. In his words, Akutami wanted to satisfy as many people as he could, a statement that is a trap toward any creative individual. The irony is tragic considering Jujutsu Kaisen's message on resisting dehumanizing forces and reclaiming one's own purpose. Akutami's situation reveals how challenging it can be to escape these cycles when they're embedded in large-scale industries with established norms and pressures. The demands of serialization meant that Akutami had to cut corners. As a result, Jujutsu Kaisen expanded to a scale so large that Akutami found himself unable to resolve it effectively. Like Yuji, Akutami was forced to become just another cog, a creator swept along by the system he'd originally aimed to critique. As tragic as the ending of JJK might be, Gege Akutami's story does not end there. Jujutsu Kaisen is his first major serialization and is a massive success, not just in terms of monetary value, but in terms of cultural impact. No other modern anime is referenced and parodied to the same extent. You know, if you think about Dragon Ball, even today we still reference stuff like entering your final form, and I feel like it could be the same thing with Jujutsu Kaisen, where maybe 10 years in the future we're still quoting Gojo. The story of this manga is flawed, yes, but it's still a worthwhile experience. As Yuji once wisely said, it was truly the Jujutsu to my Kaisen. With such a popular series under Akutami's belt, the world is his oyster. He might even start an idol manga like the one he's always wanted to make. Of course, I wouldn't be mad if he wrote another similar shonen. All I can hope is that Gege Akutami and the rest of the mangaka take care of themselves and strive not just to be a gear in this guilty society, but find a fulfilling path to blaze, even if at the end of it all, it might seem like bullshit.
That is bullshit blazing, still my heart is blazing. If the words kill me, I don't need a new